Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
And you want a quality education that opens up your world to new opportunities. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach.
And I'm Anika Madden, and I am a parent. It is Thursday, August 29th, and welcome to episode number 83, What to Include on a College Resume. In this week's news, admission deans share tips for college applications, and we're in chapter 83 of 171 answers, and we're talking through what to include on a college resume. And this week's question asks how a student who is half Asian and half Caucasian identify themselves on the common application. And Mark will be in his second part of his interview with Mr. Dave Wagner, the Director of Admissions at St. Olaf, and understanding the 7 sections of the common application.
Anika, back from Philadelphia.
Oh my goodness, how was it?
It was amazing, stupendous. So listeners, you may want to stick around to the end because I'm going to give you a breakdown of the University of Pennsylvania. But I thought I'd start us off with one of my corny illustrations.
Go for it.
Ready? All right. So Anika and Mark, we have this idea. We're going to go to an art gallery, an art display. Now, I know that's your turf. You're wondering, where am I going with this one? So we've heard this traveling display of this amazing art. There's like 100 of these incredible artworks, and we're going to go and check them out. So we go, we break up for 4 hours. We're searching this museum. And we have one goal. We're going to come back and we're going to pick the top 10 art pieces in that museum. So we gather back after 4 hours, and I have my top 10 and you have your top 10. Yes or no? Do you think we would agree on all of the top 10?
No.
And why not?
Because everybody's got their, to each his own. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
And beauty's in the eye of the beholder, to each his own. And that's exactly how selective college admissions works. You got a school looking at 100 applications to take 10 or 10,000 to take 1,000 or whatever. Different people have different personalities. They have different values. They have different views of beauty. And they're going to come back and they're going to advocate for different kids. Did that one work, or was that another 4 on a 1 to 10 scale?
That was pretty good. You know I love art, so you get a 9.
I got you in the soft spot.
Right.
I have to say, I preach this all the time, but of course, when I go to these colleges, what do? We do case studies. We read files and break up into groups, read admissions files, and we say, who would we deny? Who would we waitlist? Who would we admit? And it's what I was doing part of my time. And of course, what happens? Same thing that always happens. Nobody agrees on everything. In fact, the people overseeing at the admissions office at UPenn, what did they say? We do this project all the time when we bring in counselors, and we've never yet had the same number of votes for each of the kids. Proving the point, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And I say that actually not to frustrate, but to liberate, because one of the reasons why you may not get in your school, students, is because you just didn't jive with the view of beauty of the admission officer reading your file. All right, Anika. So we discussed in our pre-meeting that we're going to take a little break on our unsubscribe countdown that we've been doing. We're looking at the 12 reasons people unsubscribe from the podcast, and we covered the first half. And we're going to take a little bit of a break. And what we're going to do is we're going to transition to something, I call it admissions vernacular, but I've been keeping a list of all this admissions vocab that gets tossed around for a while now, and I've got over 100 of these terms in my phone. So we'll start out by throwing out the first one, which is overmatching. Yes or no? Have you heard that one before, Anika?
I'm sure I have. I feel like I've heard it, and I think I know what it is, but I feel like it was called something else. And
you want to take a guess or not?
Overmatching means... Wait, no, I don't know. Sorry.
It's okay. So just so you know, some of these I've never used on the podcast ever on here. So I don't expect you to know them all. So overmatching would be like if you're let's just put it this way. Let's say you're a student and your profile is like 3.3 and like 25 on an ACT or 1200. But you actually get in schools where the average kid is like 3.8 and like 1390 or, 32 on an ACT. So you get into a school where your academic profile is weaker than the most of the kids around you. That's called overmatching. Does that make sense?
No, actually it doesn't. It seems like it would be undermatching.
No, undermatching is the opposite. Undermatching is when you end up at a school where you're significantly stronger than most of the kids around you. You overmatched in that you got into a place where the standards were higher than your typical credentials. Does that make sense? No? Yes? Well, whether you make sense or not, that's the term.
Right. Fact. Right. That's what I was just about to say. It is what it is, right?
It is what it is.
Okay, so what are some, I don't want to digress into this too much, but what are some cases when that happens? When are we talking about athletes mostly, or?
No, that's a great question. It can happen for a lot of different reasons, right? Remember, we talked a lot about institutional priorities.
Mm-hmm.
And so if a school has an institutional priority for whom you match that institutional priority, then that makes you more valuable to them, and they'll go outside of their profile to admit that kid. So yeah, it is. It does go back to our conversation on hooks, right? If you have a really, really strong hook. One place I've seen this happen a lot is when I've worked with faculty kids, because schools generally, they don't like to not deny faculty when they apply, right? That's not going to go over that well. And so they'll go like way out of their profile to take a faculty kid.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, I could get, listen, we haven't even got into our episode yet, but you ask a question, I'm going to give you an answer. And but that's basically it. Go back and look at episode 74, I think, where we talked about hooks, and you'll see, that's when it happens most of the time.
Okay. Cool beans.
Athletes is one example, though. You were right about that.
Yeah, I figured that would be the top one, but maybe not.
Oh, yeah. I'll never forget when, this is a few years ago, when I saw that the average SAT for Notre Dame football players was 898. And the average in the student body at large was 1,400.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right, Mark, this week's article entitled Admission Deans Share Tips for College Applications. And this is by whom? Our favorite friend, Mr. Brennan Barnard. Very recently written in the Forbes online mag. And so there is no doubt in Mr. Brennan's mind that, some of these students or many students are going to be procrastinating. He says sometimes until the days or just hours before the application deadlines. And so he's saying that, he's worked with these students, of course, now in the application process for over 20 years, and he knows so well that it does not end well when that happens. So he's written this nice, beautiful article for students as a word from the wise. Now the application season is now in like Superman, oh my God, full gear. So Mark, we got another great list of tips in front of us. You want to lead the way, or how would you like to tackle?
Let me just say something. It's funny because we've had Brennan, of course we had him on episodes 39, 40, and 41 as a guest. And then we've featured a lot of his articles because he writes all over the place. HuffPost, WashPost, Forbes. By the way, both Brennan and Rick Clark have agreed to come on our podcast. Of course, we both had them on before when their new book comes out. So we've been emailing back and forth.
Nice.
Yeah, their new book is scheduled to come out this fall. And it'll just be like a one-parter, but they're going to talk to us about their new book, which I think is going to be really exciting. But I've noticed Brennan, his style, and I really like it. What he does with a lot of his articles is he gets quotes from admission leaders,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's pretty awesome. And that's what he's done here. So he surveyed a lot of different deans, and he said, can you share your best tips? It's application season. And Anika and I are trying to do a better job of timing our podcast to where people are in the process, particularly for you rising seniors. And we know, Anika, because you've got a senior, you're in application mode hardcore.
Ooh-wee.
And so, so I thought there were some really, really great tips here. Let's go through and make a couple of comments on each of them. So I really like this one by Matthew Hyde right away. I think this was pretty awesome. He's a dean of admission at Lafayette, a great school in Pennsylvania. And I love this. Here's what he says. He says, before students even begin filling out their applications, it is important to consider their approach. Reflect on who you are and who you hope to be. And then he says, it's quick and easy for candidates to share or for admission readers to assess a candidate's what. However, the hope is to find out the how and the why behind an applicant's what. If a candidate is a chemistry-loving slam poet who pole vaults, cool, that's their what. But what about their how and their why? How did they become a chemistry-loving slam poet who pole vaults? Too many candidates stop at the what and do not give the how and the why. So what do you think about that, Anika? Either his point about students need to stop and reflect before they even start, or the why and the how, not focusing on the what. What do you think?
Well, I can't read either of those enough, right? Because Janaea is, she's drafting, she's going through her, versions of her essay on the college app. And it was interesting when we first started that she wasn't thinking that way. She was like, okay, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this. But again, and Mark, I binged on all of our episodes.
You really were hardcore. You were texting me like crazy on certain episodes. You were all in.
Because I'm like scouring, because I'm like, this is current, this is it. We're here.
Let me say something, Anika, just for our first-time listeners. Anika and I both have college graduates from Davidson College, and I have a college junior at the University of Georgia, and Anika has a senior at boarding school, so she's in the crunch of this college app. And then we got little John, is he 11 yet?
He's 11. Oh
yeah. So, see, that was my strategy. Find a podcast partner that needs this information for 7 more years at least.
Desperately. No, but I took that, the Susan Tree interview, her series of interviews really touched on that too. And it was I can't hear it enough. Janaea can't hear it enough. Why? Because, we just don't think that deeply. We just, us as a family, we just don't think that deeply, I don't think, when it comes to these kind of things. So that was extremely helpful. And just, what was the first part? You said not about the why, but the...
Yeah, he brought up a really good point, and it's something I don't feel I've emphasized enough in my practice or either my students at KIPP, which is before you even start the process.
Right.
Like, some people, counselors, like literally say, like, literally get out in the mountains or get out on the water. Like, just get alone by yourself in solitude and figure out, what do you even want out of a college experience? And I think that really speaks to me, because a lot of times with myself, I've started with people at the starting point of asking them about, what do you think about location and about size? And you know what I mean? And I think moving forward, I want to back it up and actually have the starting point, like, you just thinking about, what do you really want out of an experience? Not the herd mindset.
And Mark, we had that conversation, Janae and I had that conversation the other day, again, in the binging process. But it was more so because we have been knee deep in the, location and type and spirit and, curriculum, whatever, animal science. But she had not, she has, but to do it over and over again, I think is like exercising our muscle of, getting ready to dive into all of this, is that because at one point she was like, you know what? I don't really know.
She was honest.
Right, exactly. So that was helpful for us, and we're still doing it. Like at this very moment, like we have a session with our counselor tomorrow, and this is going to be a thing this week. It's reflection is this week. More reflection. I'm not going to even say just the start of it, because we've been doing it, but it's amazing how deep we don't get because we just don't know how. I'll just say that, but we don't think we know how.
Yeah, one thing I really liked how you started out when I was talking about the why and the what versus the how. I was glad you went to the Susan Tree interview, which, by the way, listeners, there's a really great series of interviews on episodes 59, 60, 61, and 62, all about writing. And one of the things the reason I'm glad you went there is this is the biggest area where people make this mistake, Anika, is with the writing. Because remember, the Common App, it already has a very detailed section for your extracurriculars, right? And as well as for your honors. And so basically the mission officers already know what you're doing, right? They know what you're doing. They know what year you started it. They know how many hours you did it. They know all that. So one of the mistakes people make is they just kind of regurgitate their activities again. That's the what. And that's just one of the biggest mistakes that we see out here. Very, very common. So that's a good one. Let's keep it moving and keep it humming. The next thing that grabbed me is by one of my favorite people in missions, Gil Villanueva. Got to spend some good time with him last year when I took 12 students to the University of Richmond on a trip. And he's the dean of admission there. And what he says is, because you must be accurate with your answers, collect all official documents. Have them near you when you're completing your application. A growing number of colleges and universities accept self-reported standardized test scores. So access your scores online and make sure you enter all the information correctly. Ask your counselor for a copy of your transcript so you can list the right classes. Remember, the Common App is going to ask you, what classes are you taking coming up for your senior year? And about your academic honors. And that's really important for a lot of reasons. More and more schools are starting to verify that people put correct information down there. And you would not want Well, let's just talk about self-reported scores. So this is a growing trend, one that I really love because it can save you like the 12 to 13 bucks it costs to send your scores to every school. And so what schools are doing is they're allowing you to self-report your own test scores rather than have to have the official document sent. And at the very end, once you have made a commitment to enroll and you've deposited, only then do you have to send your official scores. And the nice part is it saves you money. But here's the downside. If you fabricate in any way, they will rescind. Like that's one of the quickest ways.
Or make a mistake, right?
Right. Yeah. I meant to say fabricate in a very broad sense, not necessarily intentional, but if you just make, make a mistake. So he's saying make sure that you accurately report your information. And it also pertains to you for your activities. Because you you say I did this for 24 hours a week and I did this for 18 hours. Don't you think admission officers know how to add? That's the oldest trick in the book. Okay. They did activities for 75 hours. I don't think so. We got an embellisher. And that could be totally innocent. So I really like that. Any thoughts at all on any of those points, Anika?
No, I think it's great in terms of having the documents ready and, just there. It's all about preparation, man. That you can't get reminded of that enough, right?
Yeah. And by the way, I want to say something. It's not so much a correction, but it's something. Remember last week we were talking about the Common App, Anika, and you brought up the point, like, we were talking about how there are 800 plus colleges on the Common App. And then you said, are people on the Common App because they get more applications? Do you remember asking me that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I said, yes. I said, that's one of the main reasons to go on the Common App. But I want to clarify, that's not the number one reason. The number one reason why schools go on the Common App is because it gives them all of the information that they need in a really user-friendly and easy form. So it's just extremely practical. They get all the information that they need in a real user-friendly and simple form. And it's also a win-win because it's also really easy for the students as well. The student doesn't have to keep entering all their information over and over again.
Okay.
I almost did a cartwheel out of sheer jubilation when I was working with my oldest daughter, Karis, and it turned out that all 8 of the colleges on her list were on the Common App because I knew it was going to be so much easier for her and so much easier for me. And also the Common App answers to the colleges. So every year at the end, and they're very responsive, by the way, at the end of the year, they survey their members, and some are on committees and stuff. And they say, look, what do we need to do to improve? So I just want to kind of, I want to add that dimension as well to what I said last week.
Okay, because we were talking about the gaming of the numbers and all that good stuff.
Correct. And so that was kind of my mindset then. But then afterward, we got off the podcast. I thought I wasn't fair to the colleges or the Common App. Like the Common App, because the bottom line is not, can I get more apps? The bottom line for them is, can I get the information that I need in a readable and user-friendly form? And personally, someone, like I said, when I go to these schools, I'm doing mock admissions committees. That's really a great way for them to help us counselors to really get them more, is to do that experiment. And so it's just really super easily all laid out. And when you get used to it, it's kind of nice.
Okay.
Anyway, let me stop this commercial for the Common App. They're not paying me. All right, let's come on a few more. So one of the other things that was in here, the subtitle was called Don't Bury the Lead. Here's one of the quotes that I liked in here. It said, applicants often overlook responsibilities they have at home or in their community. They're quick to list involvement in a school club, but fail to mention that they took care of a younger sibling every afternoon or they held a part-time job. Jeff Schiffman, director of admission at Tulane University, tells students, put things in proper order. The first activity should be your biggest, most important. You commit the most time to, then de-escalate them from there. Don't hide the most important ones at the bottom. And remember, we're flipping through tens of thousands of resumes and activity lists. You want to grab our attention right from the start. You know how we want you to hook us in with that first sentence of your essay. Well, do the same thing with your activities. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it was interesting because Janaea, when she was going through her list, when she was putting her resume together for her letter writers, she was saying, oh, and I babysat the dogs, the faculty people's dogs, and she did something else and something. I was like, I don't know, but put it on there anyway. So I was glad we did, because at first, back in the day, I would have been like, girl, no, that's not relevant. I don't care about that. But it does speak to her. And she even made this point. It's like, I'm, a contributor to the community. Like, I really engage with the people around me. So I was like, you're right. So that was nice.
Yeah, and one of the things there, is how long have you done it? How much have you done it? Because I've shared this before. Admission officers have joke around about the person that mentions that 1 hour in the whole year they donated blood and they put that on there, you know? You know? So we're not talking about the 1 hour out of
She's walked these
whatever
dogs quite a few
168
times,
times
don't
50.
worry.
Well, not only that, she's got an interest in animals, so it
Right,
even makes more sense for her to do that, right?
Yeah.
You know, but this isn't a really, really important point, and it's actually something I've tried to emphasize to students a lot, Anika, which is when we talk about extracurricular activities, I kind of don't like that term because what it implies is things that you do at school.
It really does. It
really does, doesn't it? And or maybe if not at school, maybe like your AAU track team or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what colleges really want to know is how do you spend your time when you're not in school and you're not asleep? That's what they really want to know. So that's why things like jobs are important. Or, you know, I'm taking care of my 12-year-old brother because my mom has to work 2 jobs and I have to cook 5 times a week. That's important. That's an activity. And in order to improve this, one of the, I didn't get into this too much, but there's some changes that have come out in the Common App. The Common App just came out August 1st. And one of the big changes I really like is they've changed the wording of this question in Anika to really make it clear that they're looking for all of the ways in which you spend time outside of school.
Okay.
I think it's going to be less confusing moving forward.
Good.
One other thing, I really like this quote a lot by Shepard Shanley, the Senior Associate Director at Northwestern University. He says, many prompts ask you to describe an important experience and its effect on you. He says, don't forget to explain the effect. Like that is so important because just today, literally today with one of my clients, Anika, we're going through her Common App, giving feedback, her and her mom. And this was my feedback. Like you did a great job explaining your experience in the hospital, but now I want you to really develop the effect that had on you. That is critical. And so it kind of goes back to a little similar to the how, why versus the what, right? Like the effect thing. Any other things on here, Anika, that jumped out of you? Because I see a couple more that I really liked. I'm going to keep going?
Yeah, you can keep going.
All right. So there's a nice one called Go the Extra Mile, subtitled. And then it says, this is a quote, Jim Rollins. And he says, I'm constantly coming across students who would have been great candidates for some of our top programs, top scholarships, but they didn't leave themselves enough time to do the few extra things to qualify for some of our special scholarships. In other words, most people, Anika, submit the Common App within 3 days of the deadline. There's massive research on that. You know? And oftentimes in doing that, they're missing opportunities for things just because they're rushed.
Right.
You know? So I thought that was a good one. And then another one I liked here, it says avoid redundancy. And this is a quote from Schiffman from Tulane again. And he says, he tells students, you take the 30,000-foot view of your application. If your activity section is all about tennis, and we've got a recommendation from you about tennis, don't you think your essay might want to be about something other than tennis?
But I have a question about that, though, Mark, because, you know, we talk about weaving the theme through the application.
Correct.
Isn't that part of your theme, though? Like, when do you stop weaving the theme?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So it is and it is. So for one thing, people are usually looking for you to be more than just unidimensional. Like, I think this is to an extreme. That's one thing. And then a second thing is, if this is someone who's going to be on the tennis team and is a tennis recruit, that's a little different. If tennis is just an activity that you did in high school and maybe you're on a JV team, but you're not good enough to be on a varsity team, you know, if you're good enough to perform at that level in the college and contribute there for them, then that's different. But if you're just doing this, like, because you really like tennis a lot and you play in your high school team, but that's not really something that you're bringing to the college campus other than that you're into fitness.
Okay.
That's when it would be different. Does it make sense? Do you see the difference?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I do.
Yeah. And then a couple others. One is a really good tip from Emily Roper Doughton, the Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at Olin College of Engineering. And she says, when it comes to who you want to ask your teacher recommendations, I love this. Don't just think about the classes where you earned your highest grades. Try thinking about what teacher would you want to have coffee with your application reader? What teacher has stories to tell about you? That's deep. What do you think?
That was deep. That was extremely helpful. Because Janaea, she did a great job in picking her folks and, and asking them to do her letters. And they do have some significant, she's been, I've read, her, we get the notes from her classes and all that stuff. So I know that there is some story time there. So I want her to reiterate that with them this week, as a matter of fact, to say, let's talk about something specific. Let's tell a story. I want her to say that.
Everybody loves a story. Stories are powerful. Yep. Well, that's all I had. Anything else, or should we move on over to resumes?
Let's move on over to resumes, but it was an excellent article. I recommend, like I said, Mark, just reading that stuff. You know how long I've been with you, and you slap me around when I'm like forgetting stuff. So you just cannot.
I'll slap you around. You think I'm an abusive podcast partner?
The Mark Stucker whoopings I be taking.
I can be verbally direct. I can take that.
Yeah, there you go. But it's all for the cause. Okay. But you cannot read this stuff enough, because our minds are going 400 miles per hour, and we need constant support and reminders. In all goodness, the way this is just great.
I really knew you would like this article. Like I'm getting to know you even more and more, and I'm like, this is one Anika's going to really enjoy.
I sure did. Thank you, Brandon.
So we'll put the link to the article in the show notes, and we would recommend anybody to read that, especially for seniors.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, yes.
Okay, friends, if you're a regular, you know that what we do in our podcast actually is we name the title of the podcast after the second part of episode, which is a book chapter that aligns with the book I wrote called 171 Answers. But it's important to know that the book chapter might be literally like 15% of the podcast. The title of our show may be 15% of the podcast. So just because you see a title, that doesn't mean that's what most of our episodes going to be on. I'm bringing this up because I was talking to one of my clients in Pennsylvania this week, and she was saying, I like your podcast. I decide which ones I'm going to listen to if I like the title. I'm like, time out. Let's stop right there. Pump the brakes. and so I don't think we ever really told our listeners how to listen to our podcast, which is, there's a couple ways you can listen. I mean, one way is to read the entire episode in the show notes and then pick and choose which sections you're interested in. Another is to start from the start. And if you like a particular topic, stick with it. If not, skip over. But we have 4 sections and really 5 now, because I've been doing profiles of colleges. And so pick or choose the ones you like and listen to those. And if you don't like a topic, we got 4 others on each episode. Was that clear or confusing?
No, that's pretty clear. Thank you, Mark. Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
All right, so now let's talk about our topic of the day. What should I include on a college resume? Anika, you read the chapter. What are your thoughts?
Well, when I was thinking about the topic in advance, I'm like, why do we have to do these things anyway? And that's how you open the chapter. Why are we doing these things? So you list out the reasons, the purpose of these resumes, the one being one that we're using most heavily is for our recommendation writers. And then we have it, you can use it for your college admission interviews. There's a scholarship application attachment. You might want to use it as a supplemental document. And then sometimes in the application itself. So I know that is probably something on another level, is that when you get into the holistic and you want to tell us what are the times that we're using them in the application themselves.
Yeah, so let's stop there because I think that's important. And by the way, Anika, I've already decided that when I eventually do a revision of this book, which I'm planning on doing in 2022, I'll add a 5th category, which is like for internships. Can also be good, internship / jobs. So I really like people to do resumes, and not mostly for the main reason that people think, because this is important. And let me just get this out there. Most colleges don't want a resume in the application. Most don't want one. They have too much to read in too short a period of time. And they will say, that's why we have the activity section of the common application. However, this is so personalized, Anika, because you've got schools like, I was just with Eric Furta, Dean of Admission at Penn, one of my favorites out here. He hates the resume. So you don't send a resume to Penn. We had Greg Roberts on our show in episode 76, 7, 8, and 9, Dean of Admission at UVA. They don't like resumes. However, Texas loves resumes. Spelman loves resumes. Brown loves resumes. So it's college specific, and you either look for it on their FAQ section of their website, in their admission section, what are their thoughts on resume? Or it's a great question to ask an admission officer if you don't see it on the website. that's as far as including it in your actual application.
Okay.
Most of the time when it is the colleges that like it will have a natural upload right there. They'll say, would you like to upload a resume? And so that's kind of a telltale sign that they like it. They give you the option. So that's that piece. But then, so you might think, well, if most of the schools, and I mean, overwhelmingly, like 3,000 four-year colleges out there, more than 95% don't like them or they don't have time to read them. You're like, well, why would you tell somebody to do something if it's a relatively small number of people that like? Oh, St. Olaf, by the way, we have Dave Wagner on, interviewing him right now for the next couple of weeks. He loves resumes. They like resumes at St. Olaf. Okay. Just had to get that in there because that's our current episode. So the reason why you do it is because if you have an interview, interviewers love the resume. Hand them the resume, and they'll pick and choose questions off of there to ask you. Recommenders love resumes because they'll pick and choose certain things and incorporate it into what they write. And that would apply to both college counseling recommenders as well as teacher recommenders. And then scholarship applications attaching them to that. But did I answer your question about, Anika, when to do it, when not to do it, how to know?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
All right. Anika and I are so grateful for everyone who has financially supported our podcast. It allows us to pay our staff and cover our other auxiliary expenses involved in having a weekly professional podcast.
At the start of every month, we're going to start sending a special gift to anyone who financially supports your college-bound kid.
I will be sending our donors this bonus content once a month directly to your email. The bonus content will be between 10 to 15 minutes in length. Usually it will be a college-related topic that I'm passionate about. Occasionally, it'll be another bonus hot topic in the news segment. Sometimes it'll be an answer to a question that one of our listeners submits to us via email.
And you'll receive these monthly audio blogs for a gift of any amount. We know that $5,000 to one person is $5 to someone else, and we don't want your budget to be a hindrance to you receiving this additional bonus content. So if you want to support our show, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. And if you've already financially supported our podcast, you will automatically start receiving this bonus content via your email.
This bonus content is our way of letting our financial supporters know in a tangible way how much we appreciate you. And if you have any questions at all about our monthly bonus content, just send your questions our way. That's to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Once again, questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. So then let's get into part 2. What makes a good resume? What makes a great resume? What were some things you remember from the chapter on this?
The ones that I really like is the way you advise to categorize the activities. I think Janae could probably do a better job with that because I didn't really think of it that way. I think we were probably thinking chronological. I think don't use abbreviations. She didn't do that, but that's something to remember. And make sure to include honors and awards because those are a lot of those things. And I've done a decent job over the years since my kids were born. Every time they have an award or something, I just tuck it away or I put it in.
Why am I not surprised?
So, and it's easy to forget those things. And, they're kind of cool. She's gotten, Janae has been on the darn head of schools list since she started the school. So she doesn't think, she's so humble, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And she just is like, oh, yeah, okay. But I'm like, girl, you better dig that stuff out of there. And how about this? Check the resume policy for your schools. Like you said, just making sure that whatever they want, do submit it, maybe submit it, give us a little bit, whatever they say. Just make sure you go into that fact section or whatever section to make sure you understand what they want or don't want.
So another one that I want to emphasize here a lot, and I put this in my book, it said, do not exceed 2 pages.
Oh, yeah. That's for the adults, too, please.
Yeah, exactly. And if you can get it on one, it's even better. I'll never forget an admission officer, and I can't remember what school she was at, but she was talking about this to a group of students about resumes. And she said, I'm 32 years old, and I can fit everything I've ever done on 2 pages. You sure as heck better be able to do it at 18.
Valid points.
There are some personal things that are not required, but things I like. Like I do like having a little bit of a photo up there. I found when I read admission files and they had that little photo up there that it really personalized the file folder. So I kind of do like that. The thing that you were referring to, and this is just something that I like, and this is what I did with my own daughter when she did her own resume for college, working with her. And many students I've worked where they categorize their activities into 2 sections. Things that they're passionate about versus other things. And the reason for that is college admission officers care mostly what you're passionate about. But here's something that I really do want to say, and this is important, and I want to emphasize this. If this is a school that accepts the Common App and you're adding a resume, what you absolutely do not want to do, and this is why the UVAs and the UPenns don't like them, is because they feel that students are just regurgitating the same thing that they already put in their activity section. Well, another reason why Eric Furter said he doesn't like these, he said, I got to look all over the place and try to find what I'm looking for, where he knows right where to look on the Common App. But those are the two reasons why they don't like it, because they find students are just being redundant. And so if you're going to do a resume, then, you know, one of the downsides of the Common App is in the activity section, you get 150 characters, which is 30 words, basically. That's not a lot. And so you'll find some schools like a Penn loves the additional information section. Oh, they love their additional information section. So they're like, if you're for Penn, they're all for including it. They just don't want the resume. They want you to use the additional information. Other people like a resume. But the bottom line is you should go more deep into the things that you really care about, because it's really hard to do it in 30 words. And that's why the people like Princeton, they're fine with the resume too. That's one of the reasons why some of the people like the resume, is because those 150 characters, 30 words is really limiting. Like you get 150 characters to describe your activity. Think about it, Anika. If you've been doing something for 20 hours a week for 4 years, you know, and now you have 30 words to describe it. That's very limiting.
All right.
But whatever you do, go in depth in more things that are important to you. And those would be the most important tips.
Okay.
Anything else? You think we wrapped it up with enough there?
I think we got it.
I think we got it too. It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Mark, this week's question is from Miss Michelle in Washington. And I'm going to read her verbatim here. How should a student who is half Asian and half Caucasian identify himself on the Common App and other applications? I know California is rolling out some changes, and I actually wonder if one will be with regards to this question, given the attention to the issue via the Harvard case. In the meantime, what have you been advising students? The student is a STEM, or this particular student she's referring to as a STEM kid with great grades and test scores with Stanford on his list.
Oh, wow. This is hard. This is one I've wrestled with over the years. So I sighed. And thank Michelle. She's a college counselor in Washington State, is one of our regular listeners. So this is why it's tricky. Most of the time when people come to us for help and assistance, they're kind of wondering, look, help me to get in. Give me like tips to get in, right? They're coming at it from that angle. And so there was a time in my life when I was a little more strategic about this kind of thing. And it's also tricky because somebody who is half Asian, that doesn't tell me enough, because there's Asian groups that are underrepresented on college campuses where it would be a real positive. Because first of all, let me just go back. Colleges want what they don't have. I've said that a million times, right? They want what they don't have. So you could be Asian and be Cambodian. Right now, that's hot. Cambodians are hot, trying to get Cambodian students because there are not that many of them. I was with a school recently that said, we struggle getting Asian women to attend our school. So they love to lock them in. So it's very difficult trying to figure out what schools will being Asian work for you versus not work for you. Are you an Asian group that is rare and they don't get that many and therefore you're added diversity? Or are you one where they have so many applications that the competition is fierce? Remember, we've said this before. College admissions is social engineering. You get thrown into a bucket. It's not just race. It could be many things. It could be the major you're applying to. It could be you as an athlete. It could be the city and town you're from. There are a lot of different buckets, and you compete with people in that bucket for spots. That's how holistic admissions works. So I've gone back and forth with this, and where I've come to and where I am now, and I feel really comfortable about where I am now, Anika, is if a school doesn't want you for who they are, then it's not the right school for you. And the other thing that's extremely important is that you let people self-identify the way they feel comfortable self-identifying.
Okay.
This is extremely important because I remember one time when I kind of had a conversation with a student I was working with, and I said, you might not want to check the box a certain way because you might be putting yourself into a more competitive applicant pool. And I could just see this deflated look that came over their face. And I felt terrible. And I've never done that ever since then. And so my view now is that you allow students to self-identify the way that they self-identify, and their own identity is extremely important to them. And however they choose to self-identify, that's what I'm going to work with. And, but this is multi-layered, because in some cases, so there's two ways we can approach it. Like, what's going to help you in admissions, right? What's going to help you for admissions? In some cases, being Asian will help you. In some cases, being Asian is a total non-factor. There's some states that even make it illegal to even use that as a factor in admissions. And there's some states where it will hurt you, can help you, hurt you, or be a non-factor. That's just the admissions angle. But what I'm saying, though, trumps the admissions angle is, how does that person self-identify? And so that's what I do now. And I've been doing that. I'm working with several Asian students right now. And I've been very pleased with that approach. It's worked well for me and worked well for them. Everybody's comfortable with it. It's a little easier now because the Common App has made some changes. So, for example, before, if a student just said, if they checked, for example, they were Hispanic, remember, Hispanic is not a racial category. So you can say Hispanic. Now you got to pick your racial category. And then, if I was working with someone who was Hispanic and Asian, they never really knew what to check. And they would be confused by that. But in the new version of the Common App, it's a lot better, because now it gives them a choice: Central American, Cuban, Mexico, Puerto Rico, South America, Spain, or other. So people a lot of times feel a lot more comfortable now that they can find a box that suits who they are. So I'm not seeing as much conflict and consternation with students in this process. But what I try to say is, do you want to go to a place if you had to disguise who you were in order to get in? Okay. Keep in mind, all the work is driven by what people check on these boxes, Anika. Schools will take what you check and they'll use that. They feel like that's really the principles of best practice, and that's really what they do. But I also feel, there's no proof I know of this, but if it was a student that really was clearly, Asian in their phenotype and their appearance, and they don't check that, and they're seen to be hiding that, I don't think that would serve them well if somebody's looking at that. I really don't feel that does. And I can remember having that experience in admissions, because it shows that you're not comfortable in your own skin. So I think the bottom line is, let people self-identify however they feel most comfortable. And then if a school wants you for who you are, fine. If they don't want you for who you are, then that's not the school for you. Now, that's not always a satisfying answer to everybody, because sometimes people, when they meet with you, like, they want strategy, like tell me what's going to help my chances the most. And some people push back kind of aggressively on that. I feel like I've talked a lot. What are you thinking?
That's deep. I mean,
it's so deep. It's so layered. It's so nuanced, because, well, why did you say it's deep? Let me ask you before.
Because, I mean, it's about that. It's an internal, how do I see myself as a person, as an individual? Forget admissions. Like,
Correct.
How do I feel about myself? What do I look at in the mirror? Like, what do I say I am when I look at myself?
But it's also deep because a lot of times people are coming at it from the admissions approach too when they meet with you. Like, that adds a level of complexity.
That's just, it's icky. I don't like it. It's just.
Yeah. And it's also, well, I mean, I'm sure that's one of the reasons why schools that don't use race at all will list as one of the reasons. But, I'm not necessarily an advocate of that. In fact, I'm not, to be honest with you. I think it's important you have all representation on your campuses, and I think that makes for the better learning environment. And sometimes that means being intentional to do that. But this is just complicated because it's so fraught and layered with so many different aspects of complexity, because it says Asian, and just because literally there are campuses where being Asian could help you in admissions. So you'd be hurting yourself to not say that, particularly if you're from an underrepresented Asian group. But what I'm saying is, what even trumps whether it helps you or hurts you, what trumps even that is who you see yourself as being.
All right.
And so now when students push back on me on that, I really throw it back in them. And I had a situation like this within the last 6 weeks, just like this, that and it was a student that was Asian, and they were aware, they felt like some of the schools that I'm looking at, they have a really high number of Asians, and I may be putting myself in a more competitive pool. and I could just skip that altogether. What do you think? I'd be happy not to check that box if it's going to help me in admissions. So this is the kind of questions that I get asked. And now there was a time when I would have, coached people in a particular way. Like if they were an Asian group that I knew was not one that was lacking in the admission pool at some of the schools they were applying to, I would have been kind of okay with that. And now I'm not really okay with that. Now, when I say I'm not okay with that, what I'm saying is it's completely a personal decision.
Right.
If somebody wants to do it, I'm okay with that. But I'm not going to coach somebody to hide their Asianness because I think it will increase their chances somewhere in an applicant pool. I'm not doing that. I'm not just going to do that. What are you thinking?
I think y'all got it rough.
Well, you see, the job is hard, you mean?
Yes.
Well, what's really hard is when people just really want to know what's going to help me the most. I don't care about all that. Like, what's going to help me the most? And I want your expertise. Like, I'm working with you for your expertise. Like, that's when that's hard, when they push back. Yeah. I've only had that one time in the last 6 months when I was like really, really, really awkward.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's just a really good question that Michelle asked. And it's one that I have tried a few different approaches. But ever since I had that experience with that student that was deflated, and then I went back and I said to myself, it's not just that she was deflated. It goes against everything that I believe in college counseling. And what I believe in college counseling is that it's your job to present your authentic self. And one of the reasons why some colleges don't like private college coaches is they think that what private college coaches do is they prepackage people too much. You know what I mean? They take the person that's coming in and it's wanting to major in a certain major that's oversubscribed on the campus, and they say, oh, no, why don't you list this major here on your application because you'll have a better chance of getting in, even that you don't have any interest in that. And that they don't like that stuff at all, right? So that's one reason why some colleges don't like private college coaches. And I've always prided myself on being the opposite of that. And it served me well with my students at KIPP, my clients, and with my relationships with colleges is just by being authentic. And so it goes against everything I believe about authenticity to try to present yourself differently from who you are. So now if someone pushes me hard, I'm going to push back. I'm going to say, I can't be in your brain. I can't be in your mind about how you see yourself. Mm-hmm. So I just can't answer that. You know better than I do how you see yourself.
Yeah, I really want Michelle to let us know how that one goes. I'm serious. I'm like so interested in the outcome of that. Like, I want to know.
Well, please. I mean, it's also tough because she did indicate that Stanford is one of the schools on the list. And once again, I don't know what Asian background this is coming from. Mm-hmm. And it's not just the Asian background, by the way. It's even more complex than that. I was doing a session with one of my Asian clients this weekend, and I don't want to reveal too much here just because, I didn't get their permission to share stuff on the podcast. But the student is from a long ways away, like over 1,000 miles away. But one of the points, and I am very candid when I talk to them about how their ethnicity can impact admissions. And I did tell them that they're presenting themselves as a very non-traditional student compared to other students that are from their country of origin. And that actually can really help them in the admission process. So it's not even just about being Asian. It's like, oh, we don't get that many. Nowadays with the Harvard case, this stuff may not even be that talked about as much publicly outwardly. But inside, people are thinking, oh, wow, this is very different in terms of the activities that you're involved in, as far as your personality, as far as how you present yourself and your experiences. Like, we don't get many students like this, and that can actually work to your advantage. Mm-hmm. You see how complicated it is? Mm-hmm. If you have different extracurriculars, a personality that they may not see as many of those types of personalities, roles that you've had, you can actually stand out as you compete with other people in your bucket. Like, wow, this is different. And your job is to be that unique piece of the puzzle that is unlike anybody else in the applicant pool. That's why being interesting is one of the most underrated things in an application. To be interesting is really, really exciting. One of my students this year, she was really concerned because she was hardly sleeping because she was working so much and working with all her APs and working with her job. And she was like, will it look bad if I drop one extracurricular she's been involved with for a long time. I'm always going to push back. If mental health is at stake, then I'm always going to say, no, you need to do it. You need to do whatever you can with having balanced excellence in your life, right? So I said, you need to drop it. You're hardly sleeping. She said, yes, it can look bad on my application. And then she was like, I think I just want to go be a drummer for a while. I know that's terrible. And I'm like, do you know how cool that may be in your application? That you're this drummer, you taught yourself how to drum and you're drumming on your own? That makes you interesting. Did I get off on a tangent on there, Anika?
No.
Felt like I chased a wild goose somewhere, ended up in the prairies. I'm like, how did I end up here? Wasn't planning on talking about all that.
All good.
Okay, friends, Dave Wagner, Dean of Admission at St. Olaf, is breaking the Common App down for us. And he talked about the profile section and the family section in part 1. And in part 2, he's going to talk about the education section and what students should include in the education section of their Common App. He's going to talk about the testing section, section 4, and he's going to talk about the activity section. And he's also going to talk about resumes, which we talked about earlier today. Listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Love it. This is great. Good stuff.
Yeah.
So the first section is the education section. Tell us about this, Dave. What goes here? What do you look for? And any tips for people completing this section?
Yep. So again, we are continuing the contextualization. So the first opportunity is for students to share with us what high school they are attending. Not all high schools are the same, and not all high schools are able to offer the same sort of curricular offerings as other high schools. So when I'm training my staff to do reading, I'm always encouraging them to think about the context of what's offered in the high school. So this is where we see where a student is enrolled. And then a lot of times we would use a secondary school report or information that we can find about the high school to start to contextualize how that student is doing in their high school and what they're taking advantage of in terms of curricular offerings that the school has to offer. It also gives us their estimated graduation date, so we can see if students are on track to graduate on time. And the section under that, colleges and universities, gives us an opportunity to see if students have done any sort of post-secondary work during their time in high school. So some schools may offer college in the schools courses in which students are earning college or university credit. Some students are able to do post-secondary options at community colleges close to their home. And so this is a place to see if students have been able to do that. Students are also able to then self-report in the Common Application a rank if their high school ranks and a GPA. The GPA, obviously, we would have from your transcript. And I think it's important to note that fewer and fewer schools are ranking their students. But if students are ranked, or if the school does rank students, essentially that's a proxy for us to sort of say, well, what is the competitive nature of this student's graduating class? And where does this student sort of fall in their class based on what's available to them? And then the final parts are essentially the current or most recent year courses. Students, I think it's important for you to know that when we're reviewing applications, often we will just have grades from your 9th through 11th grade years. And it's really important to us to see what kinds of courses you might be taking your senior year. And again, that goes back to the secondary school report and being aware of what kinds of courses your school might offer. So are you taking any AP or IB courses if those are offered? Are you doing any post-secondary courses? Many schools like to see students who are taking a specific number of math, science, social science, English, and international languages throughout high school. So this is kind of a time for students to self-report and tell us what they're taking their senior year so that we can think about all of those things. There's also an honors section in this portion. So if students are honored in some way, shape, or form, if they are a National Merit Commended student, or if they are the Rotary Student of the Month or something like that, this would be a place for students to sort of share with us anything that would be sort of above and beyond their general academic experience, and to share with us if they have any sort of honors through their academic experience.
Now, one question I get sometimes is people will say, my high school doesn't calculate a GPA. I don't even know what it is. Can I put a GPA on the Common App? And if so, do I do a weighted or do an unweighted? And how do I calculate it? So how would you answer that?
That's a complicated question. I feel like there's more and more high schools that are focused on either competency-based learning or self-paced learning. There's some schools that are not sharing GPAs with students. So I would say that in this section, I think it would be okay for students not to report a GPA if the school is not reporting a GPA. It would then be up to the admissions officer or the admissions professional who's reading the application to then spend some special time with your transcript to see if you are being awarded letter grades or percentages so that we can sort of get a general assessment of how a student is doing. There are some colleges and universities that might recalculate a GPA, and there are some that do not. But I will say that there are more and more schools that are not reporting GPAs, and admissions offices then spend time really thinking intentionally about those transcripts and the credentials that students are putting in front of them.
Now, Dave, I know some colleges do a lot of research on their high schools, where they're getting kids from. One of my former students is an admissions officer now, and we'll talk quite a bit. And they have all the data. Any particular school in her territory, she'll know how many applications they had from that school, how many kids were admitted, how many matriculated. And I know some schools even do research on like first-year GPAs from different high schools to get a sense of how the grades translate from a high school to their school. Do you guys do any type of sort of profiling to kind of get to, I don't know if profiling is the best word, but research, that sounds better,
Yeah.
to kind of get a sense of how school A is different than school B?
That's a really, really great question. I mean, we're sort of living in the era of big data. And so there's a lot of information out there that's pretty readily accessible for admissions professionals in terms of looking at, obviously, the number of applicants from a particular school admits and the number of students who choose to enroll from a particular school. I think that it's also easy for us to sort of see some general academic profile information about schools kind of in general. There's also a big focus right now in higher education on thinking about retention and really thinking about the experience of prospective students throughout their time, both as a prospective student, but then as an enrolled student. And we're doing some really deep reflection here at St. Olaf about really looking at what credentials students are presenting us with on the front end, more on a student-to-student level than on a high school-to-high school level. But then thinking really intentionally about, well, what does that tell us about their likelihood of coming and doing well here at St. Olaf? So we do spend a lot of time trying to contextualize performance within high school, and we have a lot of basic information about high schools. And obviously we know, which high schools are our top app sort of producing high schools. But here at St. Olaf, we're really kind of trying to dig deep and look on a student-to-student level. What are the factors that are really predictive in terms of how a student will come and do at St. Olaf and what are not? And then, thinking really intentionally about, well, how do we refine our admissions process to make sure that we are really thinking intentionally about the things that make a difference in student learning and success?
So, Dave, sometimes a student will ask me, I'm going to this really, really hard high school. It's this private school. It's really selective.
Yeah.
And my grades are not the same as if I would have gone to my public school around the corner. Is that going to hurt me in the college admission process? I'm sure you've had that question at info sessions or fairs.
Yeah.
And so how do you answer that? Because I've heard different admissions professionals answer it differently. Like I've heard some say, you know what, to whom much is given, much is required. And yeah, you have it may be harder to get A's, but you also have more resources. And then then others answer it differently and say, you'll be fine. We know kids do really, really well from your school, and we take that seriously into consideration. So how do you answer that question?
Yeah, I think, you sort of hit the nail on the head. I think it's a complicated question because I think it does get at resources and ability to really support students in high school. I sort of respond by saying, no, students, particularly at St. Olaf, would not be penalized for either taking a more rigorous curriculum or for being in a sort of more rigorous educational environment. But again, I think you're exactly right. It depends on the institution. It depends on sort of probably the selectivity of an institution, how many apps they might have from different particular high schools. But at St. Olaf, I would say, no, you wouldn't be penalized. And we are looking for students who are taking advantage of some sort of challenging courses or curricular offerings at a school. But again, it is kind of a complicated question.
Well, let's keep moving. That's great, though. Let's talk about the fourth section, which is the testing section. Tell our listeners of the show what goes here, what you look for, and what your thoughts are about this section.
Yeah, so I think it's really important for you to students just to think about when you are applying to schools. It's important to do a little bit of homework and to know if the institution that you're applying to will accept self-reported scores. So, for example, at St. Olaf, in the application process, we do accept self-reported scores. So if you put in test scores into the testing section of the Common Application, we will count those as self-reported scores. And some institutions will not.
Hey, Dave, why don't you explain why, that's been a growing trend, one I've really been supportive of. Why don't you explain, why you've decided to do that, the advantage, that could be for the family?
Yeah, we just made the switch relatively recently, but for us, it was really important that paying to have test scores sent to St. Olaf was not a barrier to applying to the college or being considered for admission to the college. So by taking self-reported scores, we take students at their word when they report their scores. And then we do ask for official test scores after students have decided to enroll at St. Olaf, just to verify the information that they've put in their application. But then again, students would only be paying or asking College Board or ACT to have their test scores sent once they are certain that St. Olaf is the institution for them. So the whole goal of this is to really kind of remove a barrier or an obstacle so that students are able to apply without having to worry about sending official test scores on the front end. So that's something that's important to us.
Great.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Okay, listening family, I know I promised you 10 resources on mental health, and we've shared 9. But I learned about such an incredible resource on my trip to UPenn that I'm going to take a break and share this with you, and we'll resume with our next one next week. So, Eric Furta has partnered with Stepping Stone president Sean Vereen to develop their own free online college course called How to Apply to College. Now, we haven't talked a lot on here about MOOCs, but it's an acronym for Massive Open Online Courses. And this is a MOOC, and it's produced by the leading producer of MOOCs called Coursera. This is just an incredible opportunity. It's designed for students and family members and others to learn how to navigate the college process. So it's a series of web resources, videos, and other resources, and it'll be a tremendous help for our students and families. We're going to put the link in the show notes, and Eric Furta's agreed to come on our podcast for an interview. Now, we've booked all our interviews into 2020, but we'll get him on here in 2020. We've already talked about what we're going to talk about for that interview because I got to spend some good time with him on my trip. But I'm definitely going to ask him about this course. But we'll now resume our interview with Dave Wagner. And what else goes in this testing section, and how do you interpret this when you're reading this section?
Yeah, the other thing I would just add real quickly is that it's important for students to do some research about institutions and also know if the institution will superscore ACT or SAT scores. For those of you who aren't familiar with what that means, it essentially means that there are some institutions that would take your highest subsection score from different test dates to combine those to give you the highest possible total score, which would be different than just accepting the total score from one test date. So it's important as you're reporting your test scores to also think about that. When I'm looking at test scores as a reader, or when I'm training my team to do reading, what we're looking for is obviously the total score, but then we're also looking at the subsection scores to really sort of see if the subsection scores might align with perceived areas of strength that we have sort of gathered from reviewing the student's transcript. if they match potentially with, a student's area of interest. So if a student wants to major in math, what is the math subsection score of either the ACT or SAT? So we're also looking for some nuance there. I think it's important to note that students also have the opportunity to self-report AP or IB scores at this point in the application process. And in some ways, those are interesting because they can be telling sort of related to mastery of content in a very particular area. So I think that that's something that we really think about when we're reviewing applications at St. Olaf is this is the result of studying a specific course or subject for an entire year and then taking an AP or IB exam. So we think about that. And then there certainly are some schools that do require SAT-2 subject tests, which would be testing in a particular area. But again, not every school would require that. So that would just be something that you would want to be really mindful of. I think it's really important to know, and I'm speaking from my place at St. Olaf, that I think sometimes standardized testing can be a little blown out of proportion. I think you can always find stories in the popular press in April or May about a student with a perfect test score who wasn't accepted to a very prestigious school. But I want students and families to know that at the vast, vast majority of institutions, this is one factor amongst many factors. And we're looking to test scores as just one kind of additional piece of information to tell us more about you in sort of a standardized way. So it's just adding value to the application. It's also important to note that there's a lot of schools out there that are test optional or test non-required. And so there certainly are a lot of colleges and universities that do not require standardized testing. And that is also something that you can look into in your college search process.
Do you have any thoughts on this, the environmental context dashboard that's, the media is calling the adversity score or adversity index? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's something I'm still really, really learning about. And I'm going to be talking with folks at the College Board in the near future about it. I think, the aim is to try and, again, contextualize performance within a particular school or community and to really think about all of the factors that shape a student's educational experience. So at the moment, I still have a lot of learning to do about it, but it certainly sounds like a really interesting thing. So we'll have to sort of see what that looks like moving forward.
Yeah, I'm overall a supporter of it. I'm glad that it's going through beta testing and to iron out some kinks, but
yeah,
how it's used will depend on the people around the table, right? And the philosophy of the school.
Right.
I think some of the angst is overblown. I don't think student bodies are going to drastically change because of this, because the financial models schools used, rely on them not taking too many students that are quote unquote disadvantaged. I don't know if you agree with that, but those are my thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it will be really interesting to see how it plays out and to see if it really is sort of adding information or value to the process that colleges or universities may not already know. So that will be something interesting to kind of think about.
Yeah. Now, one more testing question for you, Dave. A lot of times schools have done some research on their own performance related to testing, right? And so they've done numbers and done studies that show, okay, students that test in this particular range struggle here.
Yeah.
Have you guys put any research into looking at that, ACT, SAT scores? And obviously there's so many factors. You've already talked about all the contextualization, but what are your thoughts on using a research-based approach to know how to interpret these scores on a school-by-school basis?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. And that's something that we're undertaking starting this fall, actually, at St. Olaf, is really looking at test scores, a combination of GPA and test scores, or just GPA, and really looking at data then on a student-to-student basis to think about what's the best predictor of how a student will do here at St. Olaf. And I'm really excited. It's a great example of sort of collaborative learning because we're going to be engaging a team of math and stats majors here at St. Olaf.
Nice.
Yeah, to really do a deep dive and help us think about that. It's been a long time since we have sort of done a look at the data like that, but I think it's really important to make sure that all of the decisions that you're making, and if you are using test scores, as a way of making decisions. I think it's really important that that's a data-informed process and that you actually see how it's playing out. So I'm really excited to be jumping in with students. And Katie Ziegler-Graham is a professor here at St. Olaf who's going to help us sort of think about this process and set things up for the study. But I'm really excited to sort of see what we learn from that and then think intentionally about how that can shape our process and our review process.
Love it, love it. I'm kind of a data nerd geek about this kind of thing. When I was doing boarding school admissions, I did my own 5-year study, but I would have loved to have the resources of the data experts that you can pull to help with that. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it does. And I myself am not a statistician, so this will be really great to see some really smart and talented St. Olaf students in action.
Love it. Let's talk about Section 5, the activity section, which we all know is another important section. Explain what's in this section, Dave, and tell our listeners what you look for here.
Yeah. So students, when you are working on this section, I think this is yet another opportunity to really start telling the story of who you are. It's a pretty straightforward section, but it gives you both the opportunity to think about both the breadth and the depth of things that you are involved in. And I think that tells us what's important to you. It tells us how you might choose to spend your time when you're not in the classroom. And I think for many schools, particularly residential liberal arts colleges like St. Olaf, we are really looking for people who are going to come and be unique contributors in the broadest possible sense of the way, because we want students who are going to come and be involved in the broader community. And we think that there's so much to be learned outside of just your classroom experience. There is so much to be learned from living in community and being plugged into different student organizations, to being part of different athletic teams, being in music ensembles, taking on leadership roles, or doing service. So this is where we spend a lot of time trying to get a sense of how you're spending your time outside of school. I think it's really important to know that not all students have the same opportunities to get involved in their school or their community. We also know that some students may have family responsibilities, or that some students might be working part-time or full-time jobs outside of school. And so students, this is a place for you to showcase all of the different things that you are doing in a really concise way that tells us a little bit more about you. So it's one of my favorite sections because you can really sort of start to get a sense of, well, hey, the school day is done, and what are these students doing and what's important to them?
2 questions, follow-up questions on this section, Dave. Do you expect students to list their most significant extracurricular activities at the front? Because our listeners may not know this, there's up to 10 spots to list different activities here. Do you encourage them to put them up front? And then my second question is, you don't have a lot of room in this section, like 150 characters, which is about 30 words, to describe the activity. What are your thoughts on students using the additional information section toward the end of the Common App to elaborate? Do you feel like that's helpful to you, or do you feel like, we have so many files to read, we just don't have time for that?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And I think it is important to remember that who is ever reading your application is going to be reading a lot of applications. And that also means that who's ever reading your application will have some familiarity with essentially what can be quite similar different ways of being involved in high school. So to answer your first question, yes, I think it can be very helpful for students to really hone in on the areas that they're most passionate about at the front end of the activities section. That's where the reader will start reading, and then they'll start looking down the list. So I think that makes good sense. I think if students are very, very involved, it can be helpful to think about either the additional information section or developing resume in which students can detail in a little bit more depth the things that they're doing. So I think of the activity section as sort of a cursory look at how a student is involved, how they're contributing. But for students who might have a difficult time fitting in significant experiences or service or work or involvement, I think thinking about putting together a really nice resume can be a really nice thing. And that can also be sort of designed in a way that's very readable and easy for the app reader to move relatively quickly and get a sense of who the person is and how they contribute.
I'm really glad you brought resume up because it's one of the things I tell my students, ask the college how they feel about it, because there's some colleges that don't like resumes at all. They're like, that's what the Common Act activity section is for.
Right.
Penn is one that's been very outspoken about that, and others. And then there's schools that welcome that additional information. And so we haven't talked that much about resumes on the podcast. So I'm glad that you shared that. It sounds like St. Olaf is resume friendly.
Yeah. I think sometimes when resumes are done really well, I think it can add value in a way that the activities list does not. But I think your point is a really good one. Of course, it's so important to do your homework and to know what schools appreciate in the process and what might not add value in their process. And most colleges and universities try to be pretty explicit about that on the front end. And you can find that information on schools' websites.
And one last thing, if people are using the additional information section, are you okay if they just bullet point it there for a sort of brevity, or would you prefer sort of sentence structure?
Absolutely. I'm all for brevity. I think communicating clearly and concisely is something that is really important. And again, students, you want to remember that who's ever reading your application will most likely be reading a lot of applications in that day. So sometimes getting your point across in a succinct, direct way can be very appreciated.
Next week in the news, survive college application season with the family in one piece. And we'll be in chapter 84 of 171 answers, and we're talking honors colleges and how students could benefit from them. And next week's question is from a dad of 3 teens who wants to know about Canadian schools. And Mark will be in part 3 of his interview with Director of Admissions Dave Wagner and understanding the 7 sections of the Common App.
So, Anika, I was at the University of Pennsylvania all day Thursday, all day Friday with 43 counselors who they flew in for a fantastic experience. And this is why these schools do this, because I've probably been on that campus maybe, 8 or 9 times, I would say. Mm-hmm. And I learned a lot of things that I didn't know.
Really?
Yeah, I really did. And just by having a complete, total immersion experience for 2 days. And one of the things I came away feeling after being there is that they should really call that school Ben Franklin University. No, I say that for a couple of reasons. Because one, of course, he's their founder, right? Mm-hmm. And so he's very much venerated within the community. But what they do is they pattern themselves after him in so many ways. Like, he was an inventor. And their motto, and I was thinking about this the whole time I was there. I'm like, I'm going to be talking about University of Pennsylvania. I don't want to just focus on the stats and all that kind of stuff. I want to try to get to the ethos of the school. And I was thinking, this place is creative. This place comes up with incredibly creative ways of solutions to educating, to solving problems. And then sure enough, they said in the presentation, their motto is, we will find a way or we will make one. And I saw that in situation after situation after situation. And if you look back, they have been pioneers on a lot of different things. Like, for example, they were the first Ivy League school to have a woman as the president back in 1994. First time. And then they had another woman, Amy Gutman, since 2004. And she's extremely passionate about access and equity because she was a first generation student herself. And so they're the first school. They have like a director of wellness, like a wellness officer over all things to do with mental health. And they're the first school to do that. Well, they're the ones that rolled out CBE, community-based evaluation, which is spreading across the country as probably the biggest new invention in file reading that we've seen in terms of how to read a file. They pioneered that. So they're like not followers, they're leaders. They like branch and they venture out and do new things. The biggest thing that I learned was, I told you I've had 17 or 18,000 kids go to Penn. I'm sorry, 18,000. 17 or 18. 17 or 18. And, oh my goodness, I haven't even worked with that many students. But I always kind of felt like, so let me take a step back. Penn, of course, is in the Ivy League, right? Maybe everybody doesn't know that. University of Pennsylvania is in the Ivy League. And this school has been hot, and it's been hot for a long time. You go back to like 1991, Penn was taking 1 out of every 2 kids. Fast forward 28 years later, 7% acceptance rate. 7. So you go from taking 1 out of 2 to 1 out of 14 kids. And you say, why? right? And then, well, cities have been hot for a long time. The Northeast has been hot for a long time. And then Penn has this really unique combination of having this self-contained campus, which most people like. It's not like just buildings spread throughout the city, right? But yet you're still right in the city. So you can just pop out at 34th and you're in Philadelphia. So they've had a lot of things going for them, but I always sort of felt like Penn was very, very grad school oriented because it's the largest school in the Ivy League. Anika, I don't know if you knew that. It's the largest Ivy League school. Did you know that, by any way?
I kind of figured that. I just see it as a humongous school, so maybe I just knew it subconsciously or something.
Yeah, and so that was kind of my thinking, it's humongous because it's got 25,000 students, 10,000 undergrads. So I'm like, they got 15,000 grad schools. Yeah, they talk a lot about their undergraduate experience, but they feel very grad school oriented to me. And back in the day when I first started doing this, they used to have a lot larger classes. Sometimes when I would visit my students that were there, because I was only half an hour from there. In fact, I lived.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And when I lived in Philadelphia, I lived even closer. So some of my students used to talk about these classes are really, really 300-400. But they've really changed a lot of that. Now 80% of their classes are under 30.
Really?
Yes. And the resources that they dedicate to people's success are phenomenal. And I give a lot of credit to Amy Gutman, who came in with this commitment, and she's hired really exceptional people. Eric Furta, their dean, he's as good as it gets. And by the way, he's going to be coming on a podcast. He's agreed to come on.
Oh, nice.
Nicole Malloy, super professional, really talented. Those are the kind of people they have in their admission office. But one thing they do that I love is they focus group their students. And then they find out, what are we not doing to serve you? And then they come up with creative programs and throw resources at them to support their kids. So they have a 98% retention rate. So 49 out of every 50 kids comes back for their sophomore year. And you got to be doing something right to only have 1 out of every 50 kids leave.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah. And so just some basic things that people may or may not know. It is a place where you apply to the college, not to, like some schools, you apply just into university, right? And then you declare a major later. You are applying to 4 specific schools there. You're either applying to nursing school, which is their smallest school, take about 100 kids. And if you're going to apply to nursing, I'm going to tell you they're going to really look closely at your chemistry, and they want to see a track record of your involvement in nursing. They want to see that you've been volunteering and working in a nursing capacity, that you really know for sure this is what you want to do. They look at biology too, and they're going to look at calc and stats too, calc or stats, but they're really going to focus on those things. Or you can apply into Wharton, which is their business school, and then they have a zillion concentrations within Wharton. Another 400 to 500 kids in there. Wharton is very quantitative driven. So they really, really want to see strong quant scores in Wharton. And then they also want to see a track record, again, that you've been involved in business. Were you the person that was head of the finance club and started the investing club, and that you've done internships? They want that track record. That's very important to them. For the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, you have to have strong rigor and strong performance. And by strong performance, I mean high grades in math and physics particularly, as well as strong testing. They have their College of Engineering and Arts, and then they just have what's College of Arts and Sciences, which they just call the college, right? Just called the college in there. And that's 2/3 of the students there. It's the bigger one. That's where most majors are. So you do need to think about it, because it is a place where it is very pre-professional, and people are coming in a little bit on a mission about what they want to do, more so than some places where, and sure, you can be undecided. I'm not saying everybody has to declare a major. You can be undecided. But the culture there is that people, they kind of come in, majority of them come in sort of with a sense of what they want to do and a sense of purpose. What do you think, Anika? I could say so much more about it.
It's kind of, I don't want to say surprising, but it's enlightening. I wouldn't have guessed. They sound much more progressive in your description. And
they're extremely progressive.
Yeah, I wouldn't have.
Extremely progressive.
I mean, I haven't done much research on them, but, I just wouldn't have taken that away, just general knowledge.
Do you know that they have 57 students from KIPP?
No.
57 from KIPP.
Oh, that's awesome.
57, by far the most of any major school like that.
Wow.
One thing that you would love, Anika, they have their cultural centers. And these cultural centers, like they have La Costa for Latino students and Maku for African-American and African students. And they have Patch for Asian students. And then they have their LGBT community, and they have their women's center, and then they have their first generation center. And these are like affinity groups, which are staffed with professionals and massive resources. And then they each have student organizations as well under them. And so everybody kind of finds their niche there. Because, if you come in and you feel like nobody's like me, you can find a home there.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
And then they have an amazing summer orientation program for transitioning for first-year students. So, and students are passionate about the place. The only thing that I would say is it is a place that it's academically very challenging, and people in general are competitive. And so, not that everybody has to be competitive, but the culture, especially coming out of Wharton, is one of a lot of people fast charging and driving to make their $1 billion or to get on Wall Street. And so sometimes if someone just wants to kind of go through a discovery phase, I think there's other places where you'd be a little more comfortable just trying to figure out yourself what you want to do than a place that's so pre-professional. So, Anika, what kind of student is a great match for Penn? Well, there's an energy at Penn that is very positive, especially if you like the city. It's partly the energy of the city, but it's also just the energy of being around so many talented and gifted students. And then the boundless opportunities and all the creative programs that Penn offers. Talk about resources. Penn has over 60 foreign languages. So if you want to study a language and they don't have one, they'll actually find a professor in your area of interest and bring that professor there to teach you, even if there are only 2 of you in the class. So who does well at Penn? Well, students need to be very bright, very highly motivated, self-confident, and usually someone with some direction, at least about what they think they want to do with their life in terms of studies. But this next thing's really important. You have to be humble. You have to be self-aware. You have to be willing to reach out for help. There are resources galore. There are Weingard Learning Centers staffed with every imaginable professional you could want, from free tutoring, study skills, academic strategy, disability services. And Penn also has a great organization called CAPS. By the way, everything at Penn is an acronym. Must be like 30 acronyms I learned over my 2 days there. CAPS stands for Counseling and Psychological Services. Unparalleled resources when it comes to treatment and prevention and assessment of all medical health needs. There's individual therapy, and there's group therapy, and there's medication management. There's consultation services and referral services. So it's all there. And then they've got a great pre-freshman advisor system. It checks in with you regularly. So every imaginable resource is there. But if you don't reach out for help, Penn can be like a tsunami. It's no joke, and it can be overwhelming. Another thing I can't stress enough, they have 5 different orientation programs. That's in advance of new student orientation. And I think it is imperative students take advantage of these pre-orientation programs and the orientation program so you have your base and your foundation of support before you start in the fall of your freshman year. Now, there are very few spots for transfer students, no merit-based money, but they are one of 19 schools that meets full demonstrated need without packaging loans to meet financial need. But I left extremely impressed, and a number of my students this year are applying ED there, a number.
Oh, nice.
I can see why, because there's just an electricity. Anika, they have $1 billion in research money, $1 billion, and over 900 different opportunities to do this research.
Good gracious. Wow.
Oh, one last thing. They love community service, and they're very, very involved in going into Philly and utilizing their community service. So anyway, I don't want to make this a 30-minute additional section, but I don't know if I shared some things, but I left extremely impressed with what they're doing now for undergrads. Mm-hmm. And it really changed my view that, well, Penn is great, but go there for grad school. That used to kind of be how I used to think. Even though my kids there loved it.
Really?
My kids there loved it, but I don't think I really got the place until I had 2 complete days of immersion.
Oh, look at you. There you go. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you found this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that could really use this information. Your College Bound Kid is produced by John Lockenbaugh. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo, and marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. If you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on the show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions with an S at yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.